I want to say I feel really deeply honored to be present today on behalf of other sisters and especially on behalf of vulnerable girls and my women in northern Uganda. I am Sister Rosemary, coming from the congregation of the Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and we work in both Uganda and South Sudan, and also the northern part of Sudan. The sisters are working in refugees camp. And I am really happy that Father Charles went so deep in speaking. He actually was writing my speech. He should have been the keynote speaker. I am the director of the center called St. Monica in northern Uganda, Gulu. And this center was started as a center for addressing the needs of vulnerable girls, giving them skills training. And when I was sent in a funny way, I didn't expect to find myself in that center, because many times we sisters and even any one of us here, we are always focused on when we are sent, when we are given appointment to work, we will ask, where is my job description? I found I had no job description. I found I was not educated for that center. I had to read the signs of time and following the obedience of my spirit sending me there. And I found the signs of time was to bring some normalcy in formerly abducted girls and try to embrace them, accepting them. Today, I see we are all talking about education and reflecting deeply about transformative education. But before I can even say many things about that, I want to say the story of St. Monica has remained a story of learning for me and for the girls and many people in northern Uganda, simply because this is a center which was considered a low center, low setting. And if you talk about education of people in northern Uganda, you could hardly hear about St. Monica, simply because it's addressing the need of vulnerable people who dropped out of school. And of course, the girls who are coming to this center were deeply traumatized, most of them being formerly abducted girls. And I discovered whenever we want to talk about education, let us first see what is the priority. I found the priority for having these girls in that center was not to give them education. It was first to accept them, give them love, offer them that compassion, make them go through their past experience, their past painful experience, and get them to that kind of practical rehabilitation. And I had to do that because I was not educated, even as a counselor, or as a person who could give any rehabilitation. But again, I had to begin to think of what I could offer these people. One thing about whatever people tell about my education or my title and so forth, nobody mentions that I am actually a trained midwife and a nurse. And I was not a bad one. I worked in times of conflict. I delivered so many babies. I used procedures which I was not taught. I had to respond to an urgent need. And that is important. That is one experience. You have to recall the past experience in order to bring a new experience. And another thing which I want to remind ourselves as Catholic sisters today is that it is also very important for us to think of the original knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, that organic knowledge we acquire from home, from our parents. I used to think my mom was just a storyteller, and I realized she was telling me stories which made me to understand the history of Luo migration. When I went to school, I found they were teaching that. It was part of the academics. And of course, I was excelling. I was getting like 90 to 100% because I was writing what I learned from my mother, who was not an educated person. So those stories are the things we need to bring out. And when I found myself helpless with St. Monica, with what I could teach. I had to bring out exactly my own story of learning and my own story of how I can bring them forward. And that for me has been something we need to share always, that whenever we bring people, we have to know the importance of how we are dealing with them. In a way, we are planting some seeds, and the seeds, I always say, is a seed of hope. But when we're planting these seeds, we need to know where we are planting these seeds and how these seeds are growing. We need to follow that. And that makes me to really reflect on what transformative education and the role of Catholic sisters. Catholic sisters are well placed to address the need and the role of transformative education. I think we are very lucky because we don't have children, but we have so many of them. When we are talking about transformative education, the first question we need to ask ourselves, who are we transforming? And transformative, transforming what? It's very important for us to know we should be able to transform people in order for them to take up their own role in their own hands, or transforming the society, transforming the community in which they live. My role has always been to teach women to become advocates for themselves. That is why I valued and focused and made a shift from concentrating on theory to practical skills, and making women to focus on oral and storytelling. And that is the transformation they needed. By instead telling their own stories, it was possible for us to give them a voice. It was possible for us to let them feel they can speak about their painful experience and become advocates and members of peace building in their own communities. And when we talk about learning, I always have to think learning must make us become more innovative, more practical. Because if we are not innovative, if we cannot create a scenario where we can train people, we might always be dwelling on people who are capable of going far with their education. And yet we, religious sisters, we are always placed to deal with the poor people, to deal with girls who drop out of education. But then what are we doing for them? Let us work in such a way that we give them a second chance. We make them to validate what they know. Let us value the knowledge they bring, because they are not coming to us empty. They are already coming with the knowledge they already acquired. Maybe our biggest role is actually to validate that knowledge and empower them to share that knowledge with others. And I have been focusing a lot these days with the support from this fellowship, Hilton and Bill Gates and Belinda Foundation. My capstone project has been all around my own lived experience and the lived experience of the girls. And I had to think of how I can make their education, the role of sisters being there, which I think must become like a teamwork, team spirit. If I think of how I can educate these girls, what am I educating them in? The practical skills we are giving them is like dressmaking and cutting, hairdressing, cookery, housekeeping. Yet, all of us, most of us, have been brought up with that education where we all look forward to white-collar jobs. But when I look, dressmaking and cutting is not a white-collar job. Look at what you are all putting on. I think when you are coming here, you all looked very tidy. You were looking for the best clothes you had. Who made those clothes? Did you think of people behind those? Those are the vulnerable people. Those are the people who are non-academics. Those are people who valued practical skills. If we finish here, we move somewhere, we are all going to look for what to eat. Who is cooking? Cooking is not a white-collar job, but yet it is needed. So why don't we make this as part of the academics for vulnerable people, for practical people, letting them understand that they are going to minister to the public. They are going to be valued not for their past painful experience, but for what they are bringing, for the transformation they are bringing in the society by changing the lives of people. That is the skill I introduced in St. Monica. When I found myself helpless, when I found I was not an academic person after all, I knew I was taught how to cook. And by the way, in all the programs I ran, I brought in the skills even of taking care of children. And you may wonder why. I was brought up as a babysitter. I was babysitting the children of my sisters before I went to the convent to become a nun. And later on, I realized this is another valuable skill I need to value, because for me, learning to take care of the children helps me now to value caring for vulnerable children. And as such, I want to applaud Catholic sisters wherever you are, whatever you are doing. I want to encourage you, be innovative. Diversify your programs, bring the lived experience, and make sure you put everything together to promote the education of school dropouts and girl child. Thank you so much for listening to me and for your patience.